At the heart of this clash is more than politics. It reflects Nigeria's ongoing struggle between authority and representation. Officials defend the security response, but civil society groups, they see excessive force. Now let's welcome new Central correspondent Sagir Ibrahim to talk to us through the instance he filed in the report, as we can see from what we just saw now. Sagir, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Mas. Good morning, Queen. Pleasure.
Good morning, Sagir. So,
Sagir, many people do not know that behind the report there's so much that happens. And that's why we have our big report. I can't imagine what it was like there on that day to see the throng of supporters that came to welcome Natasha. But Queen had a very interesting note to give. Queen, if you don't mind, what was that you said while the report was playing?
Every time I say something behind, you just go. So again, my question was, where did the protesters come from? Exactly. It was a whole lot of people, and I'm certain because she's representing Kogi State. Did they come all the way from Kogi or they're from Abuja?
Well, from what I understand, Queen, these are supporters that gathered from across everywhere, literally, that they could come from. So whether it's from within Abuja or from as far as her senatorial district in faraway Kogi State,
right,
these supporters came from everywhere. That was the understanding that we got when we saw the multitude of supporters that came. And also, of course, she first was at the FCT High Court, where the case with regards to defamation that was filed against her, she was happening. She finished with that, and of course the multitude of supporters that you saw at the National Assembly gate, first of all, accompanied her to that court hearing before they proceeded with her, some of them on foot from the FCT High Court up until the National Assembly gates. With those, for those who are familiar with the distance, who stay in Abuja, it's not somewhere that's so close to each other. It's quite a distance, but these guys persevered. They walked, some of them on foot, up onto the National Assembly just to show support and solidarity for their lawmaker.
Okay, Sagir. So my question now would be, why were they teargassed? Is it that the protesters were causing a nuisance? Was it not a peaceful protest? Why did the security go all the way to, having to teargas the protesters?
Well, Queen, first of all, I'd like to just quickly correct that. Yes, it was not a protest. It was supporters accompanying their lawmaker. So I will not necessarily categorize them, as protesters as much, considering the fact that, some actions, preceded their arrival at the National Assembly, one of which is key, among which is the unsealing of her office. So if her office was unsealed before the arrival of those multitude of supporters, do we now categorize them now as protesters or just supporters fighting for the rights, of their lawmaker? Well, they got to the premises. They got to the first entrance of the National Assembly. They were initially prevented from, accessing the facility, but after a while, they were allowed access into it. They got to the second gate. They were met with the same resistance. After complaining, shouting, and all of that, the gate was finally open. But when it was open the way that it was, they began to troop in, so much so that the police officials there found it necessary to, as much as possible, try to control the crowd. This was when the tear gas started flying. How do we justify shooting, supporters of a lawmaker tear gas just because they wanted to access the premises? In other news, they were able to disperse the crowd. The few who ran, they ran. Others who resisted and stayed with her nonetheless did so. And they were able to get into the arcade of the National Assembly, of course, as you can see here. And that was when they were surrounded by personnel of the Nigerian police force. It was at this point, of course, that she condemned the tear gassing of some of her supporters at the main entrance, but also spoke with them. She called for calm. She explained to them that they were in the National Assembly premises already. This is the 10th Assembly, the People's Assembly, and as such, they should not exhibit unruly behavior because they were almost close to their demand. They were almost close to the goal. They were almost close to the prize. So there was no need for any of them to be unnecessary really agitated. From there, she proceeded to the Senate wing of the National Assembly, hoping to be granted access into, the Senate facility. She got there. I must say it was at that point that it really became clear. You know, at first, I noticed it, but I wanted to be sure. And what I'm talking about particularly is the fact that at all times that Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan got to the front of the supporters, she was allowed unfettered access. Maybe because her office was finally unsealed, maybe because she has finally been granted access to, you know, the National Assembly premises. And also maybe this is an indicator that she would also be cleared to resume on October 7 when the National Assembly, you know, resumes plenary and starts sitting again. But one thing that was so clear to me was, especially when she got to the entrance of the Senate building, was that they granted her unfettered access. And the moment that she entered, the sergeant at arms and all other security operatives who were present there prevented every other person from accessing the facility. She was granted free access. And from there, she proceeded, you know, to her office with what little supporters were able to fight their way through the security at the entry point of the Senate building. They got to the office, and of course, she gave the statements that she gave. It was not an easy one. I mean, this is the culmination of 6 months struggle from the very point when she had stood up to speak up against what she described as a violation of her rights, and also trying to silence her on the floor of plenary, which now, of course, took all of the shapes, forms, and sizes that we saw, which culminated in lawsuits, counter lawsuits involving individuals who were not initially involved in the matter. It left the National Assembly, and of course the courts went all the way to her senatorial district where a recall process was initiated. And of course, during all of this time, News Central brought all of the information and gave our viewers a front row seat, because we were there from the beginning up until the end. We were there in the National Assembly when it happened, when the court, when the cases started, when the recall process started. I was in her senatorial district, particularly in Okene, to observe the feel of her supporters, of course, which proved that what was being put out in the media was quite different from what we were seeing right there. Well, it went on and on and on. The lawsuit and counter lawsuits went on. There were statements and counter statements. There was the conversation and, of course, the rhetoric of to apologize and not to apologize. And all of that culminated on September 23 with an expectation that maybe this time, when plenary resumes, she would finally be allowed to enter. But in the wisdom of the National Assembly, because even the House of Representatives also, postponed its resumption to October the 7th for whatever reason, up till now, a reason has not been given. Plenary was postponed, but she still made the appearance. And she made the appearance in the way that she did, and she was granted access, safe for her supporters. Now, it might also be understandable why the security men at the gate, may not have allowed her supporters to enter in the number that they did. Number one, the crowd is large, the crowd is volatile, and also there is a protocol for accessing the National Assembly. So, which is, if you're accessing the National Assembly, you do so on the grounds that you were invited, you have an accreditation ID card that gives you access, or you have a visitor's tag. Of course, clearly, we can see obviously that most of these supporters, if not all of them, did not have any of this. So it would really become a big issue if the supporters in the numbers that came were all allowed, into the National Assembly premises. The Senate wing, particularly, that houses the office of senior lawmakers, they would not want a situation where, for example, maybe after accessing the office, because of how unpredictable these demonstrators, I beg your pardon, are, now say, for example, proceed from her office to the office of the Senate President. Now, I'm just giving an example. This might be one of the reasons why the security men at the gate were so cautious and also so careful as to, control the number of people at that point that access the facility. Because the moment she entered, all other entry points into the National Assembly complex itself, not just the Senate wing, were barricaded, blocked with individuals completely denied access to the facility. So this is some of what played out on the 23rd of September.
That's a beautiful roundup. Thank you very much, Sagir. Sagir, however, I wanted to note something. First of all, I loved your report. I especially loved the one where you were in front of the crowd as they were advancing towards the National Assembly. It looked like Avengers Assemble. I think I noted that inside of Instagram when it was put up. However, I'm very curious about the anatomy of the demonstrators, I don't know if this is a good case for inclusivity, because among the demonstrators, one would have expected that it'd be more women, but here we even saw men, not just young men. We saw people who were well advanced, well, not absolutely advanced, but well into their good years. So I'm wondering what statement that actually says for Natasha, what it says for Kogi State. What do you think? I mean, you can look at them there. Look, these are, you get my point now, don't you?
Well, at some point, in fact, at several locations, as you know, when the demonstrators were at the National Assembly, you would hear unexpected chants, woman king, warrior princess, and the likes of that. Maybe this is the reason why we are seeing so many men, maybe, I don't know. But women were also there represented in their numbers as well. I mean, there were some parts of the story where we actually showed shots of women dancing in their numbers, you know, proceeding, singing her name and shouting chants. Maybe the reason why we see the men in front is because they want to be, you know, the first line of resistance, support, or the first line barrier to whatever it is happen. Mr. Mas, you will not want a situation where the canisters, the tear gas canisters starts flying and it meets the women because they were the ones in front first. I'm saying maybe this is the psychology behind why the men were in front, but women were definitely well represented as I saw them in as much numbers as the men were.
Okay, then let's talk about her welcome. Now we've seen the passion from her supporters, the demonstrators. What about her colleagues, members of the Senate, or even maybe just the personnel at the gates? What were their response like to her arrival? Was she welcomed in? What did it look like? What was their body language?
Well, lawmakers were scarce. They were scarce on that day, obviously because plenary was postponed. But also, I would say that because of the general expectation that she was going to be there and the way that the security personnel at the National Assembly handled the entire process, I would say it didn't give much opportunity for her to be encountered by her colleagues at the National Assembly. However, there could have been opportunities for that to happen, maybe when she finally got access into her office. But even that couldn't have happened for as much as it would because she didn't stay so long in the office. I believe what she did on that day was just a bold statement to not just her supporters and to Nigerians, but also to the National Assembly leadership to say, I am back, I am here, and expect me boldly appear on the day of plenary. Perhaps if plenary would have held on that day, we would have seen the color and the ambience on the floor of the National Assembly that it would have taken, whether she would have gotten this welcome that you're talking about. But because plenary wasn't on, plenary was suspended, and the recess continues until October 7, many of our colleagues, most of our colleagues were scarce that day.
Okay.
Right. Okay, Sagir, and thank you for correcting me for calling the protesters their supporters. So my question now will be the people that were teargassed, so of course the people who were in front and all that, how was it resolved? Were the police able to, you know, attend to them so, you know, they get some sort of treatment? Were there injuries? Because from the, you know, the reports, we could see the pressure of them pushing through the gates.
So as far as injuries are concerned, I would say at most, because of the way they were dispersed, they are not so conversant with security tactics. But I would say maybe people sustained minor injuries. Of course, our colleagues were also on the ground and they were recipients of the very unsavory tear gas canisters. And at most, a few individuals choking and coughing here, maybe some sustaining injuries on some parts of their body, but minor, of course. There was no known incident of anyone sustaining a serious injury to the point, you know, that maybe it became so fatal and life-threatening that the person was rushed to the hospital, you know, or not. So thankfully, that measure up until this point at the back of my mind still seems like just an attempt by police officers to disperse the crowd, reduce the number of individuals that were trying to access the National Assembly at that one time. But of course, this by no means is no justification of their actions. So injuries, maybe not so much.
Okay. Well, Sagir, thank you very much for such stellar reporting. Queen also said in the beginning that it looks like the kind of crowd where somebody says, oh, I'm going to go support Natasha, and then the other person says, oh, make we go together. Just a little note there.
Like the bandwagon.
Exactly. So that was Queen. That's how her mind works. Well, thank you very much, Sagir.
Thank you, Sagir.
We'll continue to follow through till October 7th to see what reaction we get from her colleagues at the Senate. And, well, yes, thank you once again.